You know, I've been teaching here at Washington State University for, I think I'm in my 27th year, and I didn't really realize how important it was to refer academic integrity issues and things to the Center for Community Standards. I think a lot of faculty may not understand that either. And I think a lot of faculty feel like, hey, if I dealt with this successfully in my classroom, and I handled it. I just don't see any reason to refer it to CCS. Karen, can you address that at all, and why that might be important to refer those things, even though as a faculty member you think you've dealt with this already?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dave. I think one of the big values of filing a report with the Center for Community Standards when you have a student who is displaying behavior, demonstrating behavior that doesn't meet our academic integrity expectations is that it affords the student due process rights. So part of the student's right within the context of their educational environment is to have the ability to disagree with your decision as their faculty member. And that can feel really uncomfortable to know that someone is not in alignment with you. But that's part of why my office exists, is to help facilitate that. So our office makes sure that our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed, and students were afforded their right to appeal, and we take care of some of those compliance related issues that for our day-to-day compliance and record keeping and file management, that is our day-to-day. And we know that your day-to-day is maybe more focused on teaching and the academic lens and that half of the equation. So we can specialize in that area, and it allows you all to specialize in your area. So that due process right does include a right to appeal the decision, and that's where we have great faculty partners like Dee and Phil who facilitate the Academic Integrity Hearing Board. So students can express why they disagree with your decision, they can provide evidence to the file, and have the opportunity to fully explain themselves. In addition to just the record keeping and appeals processes, the other part is our office has the ability to assign what we refer to as educational outcomes. So it's a two-part process, and when we're meeting with students, we talk about the academic consequence, which is generally failure for the assignment or failure for the course, something in line with your course syllabus, and then the academic and then the educational sanctions. And those are sanctions that are determined after a student meets with a conduct officer from my team, and they can include things like connecting to resources on campus. We have an academic integrity seminar. We have some research and skill building around values and why academic integrity matters and how to avoid future violations and things of that nature. So in addition to that consequence in your specific class, we're also looking at how do we provide the resources and the support to help students from making a similar decision in the future.
How can a faculty member avoid having students posting their course materials online? And what do we do as faculty members if we actually find our course materials out there somewhere? This is open to any one of the three of you who'd like to take this one on.
I think there are a couple of approaches. Dee just mentioned a sort of preventative medicine approach where you're really proactive at the start of the course and are really clear about professional practice, the fact that as a student, you're becoming a professional, and we want you not only to study how to be a professional, but model that professional behavior. So if there are professional boundaries that you can teach, that can be part of the lesson. The other thing is that I think students really want to know where that line is. And they want to stay on the right side of it. The general intention is good. Occasionally, Dee and I will deal with cases where the infraction is accidental because students didn't know. So that's what you want to prevent. Maybe you want to give them an exercise where you give them some training in the gray area. Sometimes the black and the white on the extremes is very clear, but the middle isn't so clear for your students, especially if they're novices learning a field. So a great first week assignment or a great introductory type of thing could be a quiz or could be a reflection about whether students see this specimen as a violation, or we've talked about some great examples where in say the arts, you could do an homage to a famous artist and adopt their style. Well, is that plagiarism? Is that is, where's the boundary? I'm not an artist, by the way, just to be clear. So I don't know that I would know where that boundary would be, but if using the stylistic cues from something is acceptable, then students really need to know, where that boundary is. So my suggestion, again, is to get out in front of it and maybe devote some extra class time instead of assuming students know what you know and know where that line is.
Thanks, Phil. Dee, Karen, would you like to add to that at all? And I'm really, really curious about this issue with things being posted online. Is there any way to get at that? Yeah, Karen?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've already talked about preventative medicine a couple of times, and so certainly setting clear expectations is part of that. There are a number of places and spaces in which students will post exam content, homework assignments, other course materials online. And some sites are really responsive to taking that work down if there is copyrighted content on it, and some of them are a little bit slower to respond. And so I know specifically some of the sites do require a letter from the institution, from someone conducting an academic integrity or behavioral investigation in order to report back or provide information about what occurred or who accessed that information. So for example, chegg.com, if there is information from your course that's posted on Chegg, I can provide a letter on behalf of the university asking for additional content about the material that was posted. So that can include, Chegg will return back and they will take the content down, and they will return back and say it was posted by this person and these are the people who accessed it. Sometimes the people who accessed it is very obvious because they've registered with their WSU ID or their WSU email address, and sometimes it's pretty hard to attach those to a specific person. But the biggest thing is reaching out to our office, and we can walk you through that process. I can provide you the forms you need to ask them to take it down, and we can get you that additional information about how that material was utilized.
Do you ever find that sometimes faculty have different opinions regarding things like plagiarism? What is actual plagiarism? And how do you deal with those issues? This is open to any one of the three of you. Karen, you want to go?
Yeah, I'll take a first start at that. I think it is challenging, and what you mentioned is very true. We see a wide variety of reports come to our office with different perceptions on what constitutes a violation and what constitutes a learning opportunity. And so when we are meeting with students, especially after they've had their first violation, we try to talk really intentionally with them about understanding the role that their faculty member has in setting expectations for their courses. And so, the example I always use is, what's okay in a math class when you're writing a proof might not be okay in an English class, and what's okay in an English class might not be okay in engineering. And so as a student, part of the responsibility is on the student to determine what those expectations look like on a faculty to faculty basis and on a field specific basis. That being said, there are some commonalities, of course, of how those policies are defined, and some of the proactive pieces from the student lens can be helpful in understanding what those expectations look like. But in our office, we do acknowledge that there is a difference between fields and there is a difference between faculty members. And at the end of the day, you have the autonomy as the instructor of record to determine what your course expectations look like surrounding academic integrity.
Phil, I think you wanted to get in on this too, didn't you?
I want to echo just what Karen said more eloquently than I, but the one thing I think a board looks at when there's a report and when there's an appeal is whether those expectations, were clear at the beginning and then enforced consistently over the arc of the course. You wouldn't want, that line to move during the course or for a specific student. Sometimes we hear some other contextual things that maybe influences the instructor, and our goal is to be objective and focus on the facts and evidence as presented. So in this context that we've talked about, when you're sanctioning a student, if you're going to deduce points or within your policies of the course, then it's appropriate to make that report and have that be a matter of record with the community standards folks so that we can determine if there's a pattern and change the sort of learning outcome that Karen mentioned in her opening comments. So consistency is an important thing. Just to summarize, keep those rules in play, constantly remind your students about them, especially as they go through the course. You know, the second paper, the third paper, they may be more tired. They may not remember what happened on the first day of class. So it's important to just get some repetition in there. The important things come up again and again.
But I have this colleague who likes to sit out in front of the building, and he likes to call people on it when they go in or out of the wrong set of doors. Now, I think that's a little over the top, but I think he's got really good intentions. And I think I'd really like to hear from the three of you as to what to do when we see people who are not in compliance. Karen, would you like to start off with that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of looking at our community response to this pandemic is that it requires initiative and buy-in from every one of our community members. There's no one individual person who can singularly change the direction of the global pandemic. And so I think we all play a part in making sure that we are holding our peers and our students and our community members accountable, while also, giving ourselves grace that, sometimes you might forget your mask, or you might forget to put it up because, 6 months ago, that wasn't part of our narrative, and that wasn't part of our muscle memory. And so if you do experience people who are not following the governor's orders, or not following the regulations regarding to COVID, the first step, if you can do so safely, is just to ask them to comply. If they don't, then the next thing is to be a little bit more directive if you feel comfortable doing that. So, I really need you to put your mask on, or I really need you to, in Dave's example, go in the outdoor, out the indoor. And then if they're not going to comply, you have the option to remove yourself from that situation. And then you can report to our office. We don't want you to put yourselves in physical danger at any time. But our ability to address that situation is also dependent on being able to identify who that was. So in spaces where there may be card access, or our student spaces like the Chinook, if you can connect with the staff that are there so that we may have the ability to identify the person involved, that would be great, because it allows us to be more responsive. And ultimately, the more information that we can gather about specific students who aren't meeting our expectations, the better we can address those students. Because like Jill mentioned earlier, while it doesn't always seem like that, because of course the negative feedback and the bad news gets more traction, there's a lot of students here in Pullman who are making really safe choices for them and for our community. And so if we can continue to change the behavior of the few, that will ultimately help us out. So we appreciate everything that you all do if you're out on campus and in our spaces right now, in helping remind folks and referring people to us who are not being compliant with those directives.
What does Washington State University do if I report somebody?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you report someone specific for COVID compliance, but this generally applies to other types of behaviors as well, the university in my office will look at that report, and we will identify the level, for COVID specific, the level of risk. And so if you were in passing with someone, they forgot their mask, you ask them and they put it back on, that's a different level than if you're hosting a party in terms of the risk there. So we'll assess that to look at what level of violation it might be, and then we'll contact the student. The three outcomes or the three processes that are most likely is we might send the student a warning. We're most likely going to contact that student and schedule a meeting with them with a conduct officer so that they have the opportunity to tell what happened from their perspective. And then ultimately the conduct officer will make the final decision as to whether they're responsible for that violation or not. And then that conduct officer assigns educational sanctions, including public health education workshops that are being facilitated by our Cougar Health Services, disciplinary probation, warnings, making some action plans so that they can be compliant in the future, and things of that nature. The other possible outcome is referral to the University Conduct Board. I briefly mentioned earlier that in our system, the only body or entity that has the ability to suspend or expel students is the University Conduct Board. And that's a very formal process. It is quite lengthy, and students have the right to be represented by an attorney, and there's a lot of layers and process involved in that. And so in the event that a student has already been contacted for more risky behavior regarding COVID compliance, then it's possible that the next step might be referral to the University Conduct Board with the recommendation of suspension or expulsion from WSU.
How long does that process typically take from receiving a report to an outcome? Can any of you comment on that for us?
Yeah, and I guess this answer is going to be a little bit different depending on what type of report it is. And so if we're looking at COVID-related reports, that would be through our general conduct practices. If we're looking at academic integrity reports, that goes through the Academic Integrity Hearing Board, and so that can look different. So I'll kind of give the 30,000-foot view of what that looks like. So we get the report in, and from the general conduct perspective, we give the student 10 days notice of their scheduled hearing. That gives them the opportunity to prepare. It gives them the opportunity to attend an information session. We do have peer facilitated information sessions that are available 5 times a week via Zoom, where students can understand what their rights and responsibilities are, how to access resources, how to request their file, what to expect when they meet with a conduct officer, all those sorts of things. So it gives them time to view an information session. It gives them time to connect with an academic advisor, and it gives them a chance to review their file. At that point, if the conduct officer makes their decision, or closes the investigation, and they're not adding new information, they have 10 days from that date to issue a decision. After that, the student has 21 days to appeal that decision. So then, if you're doing some rough math, you're 41 days from the date of the incident or so. Once they appeal the decision, then it goes to the University Appeals Board, and then they have the opportunity to respond, and then they respond back to the student. And so our process is not super fast, and that's intentional. It's because we are rooted in education, and so we want to make sure that students understand what their rights are, that they have the opportunity to respond. If they disagree, they can disagree, and we support them in that. We want to help them think critically about why they disagree and how to articulate themselves in disagreement. And so that would be kind of a general conduct process timeline. With academic integrity, it depends a little bit on the schedule of the boards. And so depending on how many cases we get referred, and what the next available academic integrity hearing board spot is, that can impact the timeline. So it's similar to the general conduct, but it also is somewhat reliant on the academic integrity hearing board schedule.